Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. Welcome to our second speaker in our speaker series on AI. I'm glad that you can be here. We're very fortunate to have Camilo La Cruz with us today from Sparks and Honey. I'll introduce him in a moment. Before I do that, I just want to give you a little bit of information. First of all, I have to thank some people. First and foremost, we want to thank the Grants Office for helping us secure the grant to put on this programming. It's been really great. We have a series of speakers, but also with those speakers, we've invited a cohort of 20 adjunct faculty to participate in this program, and they'll be developing materials for their courses later in the semester. So it's a great opportunity for us to enrich our classes with AI. So Camilo La Cruz leads the strategy practice at Sparks and Honey, serving as Chief Strategy Officer. Camilo has shaped Sparks and Honey since its inception in 2012, and in his current role, Camilo is responsible for the long-term vision of the company's consulting services and intelligence products, working with interdisciplinary teams and partners to identify strategic priorities and develop the capabilities to execute them. Before joining Sparks and Honey, Camilo worked across the strategy, creative, and planning departments at RAP, touching several Fortune 100 brand accounts, and spent nearly 4 years as a planning director at the independent multicultural agency, The Vital Partnership, building the company's digital practice. Throughout his career, Camilo has worked with organizations such as AT&T, DARPA, Humana, Mercedes-Benz, MetLife, Nestle, PepsiCo, and Red Bull's Human Potential Group, among others. I'm really glad that Camilo can be with us today, and please help me welcome him with a round of applause.
Thank you. And thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the warm introduction, Brian. It is a pleasure to be here. So before we'll get started, I'll tell you a little bit about my background, where I come from, and how I got to work with AI so closely. My background is primarily in the communication strategy, UX design, and innovation space, right? So creating new products and understanding what makes people tick and how to position new ideas out in the market. I had the good fortune of intersecting with sort of the digital space very early on in my career, so that's sort of the space where I focused on most of the time. About 12 years ago, the founder and CEO of Sparks and Honey, Terry Young, invited me to help envision and start the company. It's been a really great 12 years. A lot of change happened, as you can imagine, in the industry. And particularly since our focus is, let's understand change. Let's help organizations, and we worked with a wide range of organizations in the public and private sector, understand how change will have an impact in their business, in their future, in their purpose, over different horizons, right? So we typically work in the horizon 2 and 3, so 3 to 5 years, 10 plus years ahead in the future, understanding, okay, if this is happening, what are some of the possible scenarios and possible futures that you could then take into consideration as you're designing product, services, or even the structure of your company, right? In that context, back in 2012, when we started the company, we realized, well, there's a couple of things that you need to take into consideration if you're going to do that in this day and age. One is, how do you survey culture? How do you survey a society in a way that allows you to be comprehensive enough to formulate hypotheses around what are the signals of change? Like, where do you point sort of your smarts, your strategy, if you're a company looking for opportunity in change? And the other thing is, if you're going to be in that business, right? And I remember at the time there was a lot of debate about like the nature of organizations in the private sector, and Netflix had leaked an HR document that made a lot of noise in the industry, where they said, oh, we're not like the metaphor that was like, we're not like a team or a family, we're more like a team actually. And this is about like, performing, et cetera, et cetera. So we were asking ourselves a question like, what is our metaphor, right? And what is sort of the space that we play in as an organization? And mind you, I mean, at that point in time, it's just like 3 people. So we were a little bit, so futuring a little bit for ourselves, right? And I think we landed in this idea of the learning organization, right? So we built Sparks and Honey from the ground up to help us learn and put in place systems and methods and technology that allows us to learn about new areas of change, and then be able to bring people along, right? Whether it's our employees or clients or anybody that we're working with, to understand new topics and new ideas in ways that are productive, that allow you to construct strategy. So that's a little bit where I come from. In terms of the next 90 minutes or so, what I prepare here, it's a bit more sort of detail around what we do, just to give you a context, right? So you understand, okay, when we say collaborating with AI, which is sort of the topic that I like to bring here today, how do we incorporate AI into our work, right, as a learning organization and also as innovation and foresight strategists and consultants? So it's important that you see what we produce and how we work. Then I have a bunch of use cases. We have an AI lab, and we have a tool that we use internally to produce work for our clients. We call that tool Q. It started very basically at the beginning of the company as an idea. We did a lot of the work by patching together different systems, and then over time, sort of technology catch up a little bit with where we were, and we started to produce more of a software, a piece of tech that all of our employees can use on behalf of our clients. So I want to walk you through a few case studies. And again, wearing that hat of learning organization, of how are we employing AI, and it's wrapped in a bit of thinking about that hopefully will help us sort of understand a little bit how we think about when it's appropriate to use different types of AI. And I know there's a lot of discussion around AI in the classroom, and when it's okay to use tools like generative AI or not, what are the proper use cases. And then at the very end, just a bit of thinking about what are some of areas that we're watching this year from the point of view of innovation happening, that I'd like to share with you if you're planning syllabus or if you're thinking about new areas of research. This could be interesting spaces. So with that said, I would say probably we'll take questions at the end, but if there's anything that you don't understand or etc., raise your hand and we can talk about it as we go as well. So as I mentioned, we started the company in 2012. Our focus is on what we call cultural strategy and innovation. Really our remit is to help organizations understand change, what it means for their business and their future, be able to look at different scenarios and then make choices as to what to do today, right? I mean, the only reason to look at the future is so you can examine your present choices. The organization is sort of divided in two broad areas. One is the strategy part of it is, primarily, again, focused on a lot of product innovation and service design, a lot of questions about organizational design, like how do you organize yourself and what kind of disciplines and skills do you need to play in the future, right? So that's sort of on the left, the foresight and innovation strategy. And on the right, our intelligence platform, which, as I mentioned, we've been building since we started the company. And it's now a fully functional piece of software that essentially helps us do our work in different ways, right? We're also, as I mentioned, this idea of being a learning organization means that we're always interrogating different spaces. We are conducting research with partners, and some of it is public. We do twice per week, every single week of the year. We do briefings on different topics. We bring experts to our office. We stream them on LinkedIn, so you can watch them, or you can sign up online and come join us. It's pretty much an open platform for us to examine new ideas. So in the context of research, from an AI standpoint, it is a space that we've been playing in for a while now. This is some select topics that I wanted to sort of bring up to you in case there's any questions, but also because these are areas that we've been tracking for a while, right? So we've been able to formulate a point of view from multiple perspectives, a very layered also a perspective because we address AI from the point of view of researchers, right? So, for example, on the bottom left here, we have a paper we wrote with Rand Corporation back in 2017 about AI ethics. So thinking about bias in AI and a lot of different questions from the point of view of AI innovation as well. So we do that as researchers, but we are also building AI, right? So we ask ourselves the question: what is the best way to approach a question like ethics, right? Is it top down with sort of a vision of what ethics is going to do, like Google famously like put out their own a version of it, or is it more bottoms up as you build it and as you create it, right? Understanding a little bit that there's going to be a lot of blind spots from the beginning. Another piece of research that I think was for us very, very important is in 2019 we're with the World Economic Forum working on truth and trust, particularly in the context of commerce, right? And in that particular piece of research, we went pretty deep in the area of reality manipulation and the possibility of now we call them deep fakes and all that. And also in the implications of a lot of consolidation of investment across multiple industries that were expanding from wearables to smart home to smart city. This is a little bit like our context being dominated by a few players. So just a couple of examples of some of the research that we do in the space. When we say AI, right, and I know that I'm number 2 on this series, and it's so great that you get exposed to different perspectives, and I know that the first speaker came a little bit with foundational knowledge. I do want to clarify a little bit what do we mean by AI in the context of some of the experiments that you're about to see. So a couple of concepts that I think are going to be useful, and hopefully you'll find them useful also as educators, because I think they could, particularly this first one here, can become an interesting filter in the context of when is AI useful or not for certain use cases. So the first is deterministic versus generative. This probably was covered in your previous section, so sorry if I'm being a little repetitive, but I'll definitely come back to this more and more, right? So the idea of deterministic AI, which is more the classic machine learning, like what we've been seeing up to like the craziness of ChatGPT a couple of years ago, is that deterministic AI is going to be more rule-based. It's going to be a lot more structure and narrow in its application, and it's going to be a lot more accurate to an extent in certain ways, right? So I would say when you compare it with generative AI, which is more about pattern creation and about probability, you're going to see that there is a stark contrast in the sense of one being more analytical, the other one being perhaps more creative and imaginative, right? So I love this example. Traditional AI or deterministic AI is about like a really great algorithm that's going to know which song you're going to like. Generative AI is about like creating the song, like from scratch, right? So that's a distinction I wanted to make, and we'll come back to it in the context of some of the tools that we create and how we use them. The other is that when you think about generative AI in particular, which I feel like, for most people, generative AI has been sort of the introduction to AI. Like suddenly, hey, we have AI that we can all use, and it's a chatbot, and it's easy to access for most people, so on and so forth, right? There's a lot behind generative AI that creates confusion. There's a lot of noise in the industry, so just wanted to point that this framework in particular is sort of a generative AI tool stack developed by Jeremiah Onyan, who's one of our advisors, by the way, really great AI analyst from Silicon Valley. So in this context, you start from the bottom. You have sort of the data layer. We're talking, a significant amount of data that very few organizations can handle. And this is where a lot of the controversy on, artists saying, I don't want my art to, it fuel your AI, or I don't want my writing to fuel your AI. The New York Times sued, a few companies. So that's where it's focused, right? The second layer on top is AI infrastructure, or also known as the computing environment. That's also terribly complex and expensive. to the point that, we're talking, like, I remember when Rishi Sunak out in Great Britain, like, came out with a big, like, AI plan, like, last year. I don't know if you guys followed the story. A lot of experts told him, hey, dude, you can't do that because we don't have access to a computing environment because we're no longer part of the European Union. So we're talking countries don't have access to that type of computing environment, right? So it's very difficult to access. And then you have the foundation models on top of it. Primarily, we talk about large language models, right? And there's now small language models. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. They have a lot of promise. It's an area that definitely recommend you get smart on. And then you have the layer on top, right, which is apps and agents. And that's where we play, right? And that's where most companies that are not Google or Meta or super powerful tech companies are going to be playing in, right? So it's tapping into all of that infrastructure in ways that give you a competitive advantage, that give you more control over how do you tap into the data, what kind of data do you use, and how do you employ the model. Does that make sense? So in that context, we built a tool that we call Q. It's a cultural intelligence platform. And in essence, the vision behind this is to say, hey, when you look at how most organizations in either public or private sector are analyzing society, are looking for change, are looking at consumer data or market research data, et cetera, you sort of have this a world of corporate strategy that's very smart in looking at, like, for example, venture capital investment and smart money and science and technology or academic research, etc. And then you have this world of marketing that's looking more like TikTok or social media and articles on the press, etc. And the problem is that we're in an age of a lot of convergence happening, right? So if you want to really understand the true potential of an idea, you got to look at both, right? And if you look at both, how do you normalize it, right? How do you bring it together, right? So this platform is meant to have a wide aperture. Right now, as of this week, we are looking at 368 million signals across the world. And then we normalize them against a taxonomy of trends that we call the elements of culture, which is the hexagons that you see here in the middle. These are some of the data sources that we look at. And the main message here, because there's a lot of text and the takeaway is we look at data in a spectrum of fast to slow culture, right? And this is an idea that was brought to the table by a few cultural anthropologists, I think most famously Grant McCracken, 20 years ago or so. And it's again the idea that you have different layers in culture, they move at different speed, and analyzing across those are incredibly important. And there's all sorts of things that you can do when you structure cultural data in this way, right? Because sometimes when a layer that's supposed to be moving slower than the other moves faster, you start to see a lot of disruption, right? So things like that. Our taxonomy is about 121 trends. We revisit this taxonomy annually. We've been doing it for 12 years. It's not the only way in which we normalize the data and look at it, but it's one way that's important. You're going to see it in some of the demos that I carry. The way in which we apply it to our work, and again, it's a bit more context, is typically in methodologies that are coming from the world of strategic foresight and design thinking and innovation, so on and so forth, right? So anything from really going and understanding, okay, what are the emerging trends in mental health, right? And understanding how mental health is intersecting with every single aspect of culture, from technology to education to healthcare to parenting, so on and so forth, right? So how do you do that in a way that's comprehensive, that you can trust to make decisions and to understand, okay, what's mainstream versus what's emerging, and from that emerging to be able to quantify it. So all the way from that to more bringing that data into play for the purposes of envisioning designs or experiences or new products or services, right? So an example of doing that in the context of looking at a trend that we call mind management, and understanding how that intersects, the idea of being able to somehow control your mood state connected to a place like content, for example, like media, right? So what is that intersection? And if you think about, I read the other day a piece in the New Yorker that was stating that if you look at the 120,000 music tracks that get uploaded to streaming platforms every single day, think about that, is a mind-blowing number. The great majority are about like stress, focus, relaxation. It's like a functional music to an extent. So this is that, right? So you can then use the platform to look at it from the point of view of on the bottom right, you know, what are the startups in the space, who's funded, how do they cluster, what are they trying to solve for, what needs are they anticipating, right? Or you could look at it from the point of view of the top of, you know, where is all the money going, right? So you can do many things. You could also flip it and say, I want to see how people are talking about all these, like music tracks about relaxation. What language are they using, right? Because if I'm going to launch a new thing, I need to understand that. You could also imagine future ideas and then bring them to life experientially. This is a lab that we created, Maker Faire New York, with 4 different futures around packaging and beverage formats and things like that. Like we had one that was on edible packaging, right? So would people eat their packaging at the end? That would be a great solution. You don't have to recycle. It's like the ultimate composting. So in that context, right, if that could be a concept of the future, right, why don't we bring people and let them make their own packaging so they're not gross out? And we did it with flowers and liquid nitrogen, by the way. And then see if they eat it, right? So as experiential design futures is another thing that we do. Or we could like use those ideas and that input to bring this to life in more graphic ways and ways that people can see and interact and so on and so forth, right? So that's a little bit of what we do, right? So now I want to shift to how we do it, right? And again, going back to this idea of collaborating with AI or making AI a box in the org chart, right? So if you're going to make AI a box in the org chart, then what is the job description that you're writing for AI, and how does that job description changes your own job description, right? And this is going to be the dance that we're going to play until we're replaced or we're somehow doing something different. So in that context then, a few use cases, right? So the first one, I want to go back to the idea of deterministic AI versus generative AI, right? So this Venn diagram is not exhaustive, but it's meant to say there are use cases that are great for deterministic AI, there are use cases that are great for generative AI, there are use cases where you can do both, right? So deterministic AI is a really great tool to inform decision making, right? Because you're using classic machine learning to say, I'm gonna teach the AI to recognize dogs versus cats, right? And we all see in the research, right? I mean, it's much better than anybody else, and any human at recognizing dogs anywhere, in any picture, so on and so forth, right? Or I want to teach the AI to identify a spot in an X-ray that could be something bad for the patient, right? And it becomes like much better than radiologists, etc. So that's deterministic AI. You're going to trust the AI because those models are trained to do something very narrow, and they know how to do it really well. In our case, we're looking at identifying and quantifying trends, analyzing like large bodies of semantic data to look at patterns, identifying sources of influence for a topic, so on and so forth. Then you have generative AI on the other side, right? And it's a really great tool to think creatively, right? And build scenarios, for example. It's not a tool you can ask generative AI, like what are the trends influencing X or Y space, and you're going to get an answer. The question is, are you going to trust that answer or not? I think the state of the technology today, I wouldn't trust it, right? But that doesn't mean that it's bad. It's like if you follow the controversy on Gemini, Google Gemini this week, founding fathers of color and all that, right? There's a whole explanation about how they got there and what they did wrong. But if you're looking at it from the point of view of like someone who's like doing some historical documentary, etc., that person is going to get it all wrong working with Gemini. But if you want to use it from the point of view of investigating alternative versions of history and things like that, more speculative design, it might give you some ideas that humans will not be able to get on their own, right? So this is how our tool looks like when you're working at Sparks and Honey and using it for a project. It invites you to explore a topic. And I want to focus on the left side of the bubble, on the deterministic part of it, right? So the way the tool works is, as I mentioned, it's looking at 360-something million signals worldwide. And it's allowing you to interrogate that corpus of data semantically, right? So in this demo, I'm going here looking at mental health. I'm creating a project around mental health. On the side of the query here, you can see it's using Boolean logic. So it's like very much talking to the machine. It's like saying all these keywords, exclude these keywords, like group these keywords on us. So I'm not telling it what I want. I'm just giving it a list, an organized list of keywords, right? It can look at the trends, but it can also look at the signals. These are 779,000 signals. I'm going to look at one here on long COVID, for example. It's tagged to a few trends that you can see on top. I could come here and say, hey, translate this into Arabic or Danish or Esperanto. I don't know why we have Esperanto, like, look at that language. So this is French, so it translates the entire thing. This could be an academic paper, it could be an article in the press, it could be a post on social media, so on and so forth, right? So you see the trends, you see the signals. Now I want to know, okay, but which signals are in front of people who are younger, for example? So I'm going to go and say Gen Z, and I'm going to say maybe I want to see mental health and Gen Z females, for example, right? So this now connects to a database of a panel, essentially, and it's looking at clickstream behavior to say, okay, if you are looking at trends on mental health and you want to focus on a specific audience, these are the trends that you need to focus on, right? So at this point, what we're looking at is very much like machine learning that's been trained across different models to do things that are pretty much what AI has been able to do for the last sort of decade or so. It's just pointed at our own use case, right? So you can be an analyst and say, okay, I want to understand mental health in culture. I want to understand what are the topics of conversation that culturally are most connected to mental health. And then I want to understand how that impacts different groups of the population, right? So that's sort of the question that you're answering here. That's a question that you definitely want to answer with tools that are more on the deterministic side, right? So going back to this Venn diagram, we say, okay, but what are some of other use cases where we can use more generative AI spaces, right? So we come back here to the tool, and now we built a different feature that is called Q Assist, right? So in this particular case, Q Assist works same way that you could interrogate any chatbot. We've also built some pre-engineered prompts, and I'll talk about that in a second. And we've also created some expert data rooms, right? And that's sort of at the top right. This particular pre-engineered prompt is about headwinds and tailwinds. So what is like propelling an industry, or what could be a headwind, sort of slowing down. I did a query on the fashion industry. It is giving me a bunch of different options that I could think of. And then I can go back into the more deterministic space, and I can validate and I can interrogate. Because one of the insights that we had when we started working with this is, okay, we have a very powerful tool in machine learning AI that can analyze all these signals all over the world, etc. What do you ask the tool? A lot of people were like very paralyzed. So sometimes you have a client and you have questions, etc., right? But sometimes you see a search bar and you're like, okay, I don't know where to go, right? So generative AI became a really powerful companion to let's explore options and then go and see what makes sense, right? And do it iteratively, right? So three things that we did with, remember back to that chart of the tech stack of generative AI. So the data, you have the computing environment, the foundation models, and then you have apps and agents. So this is an app that we're customizing inside our walls, right? So we did three things, right? So we have, number one is the pre-engineered prompts. We did the data rooms, and then we also included the ability to give us sources. So where is the AI getting the information? And that allows us to create a validation cycle where we can check it's not like foolproof, no hallucination, but it definitely helps with validating the information that you're getting, right? the expert data rooms and the response models, right? So an expert data room is essentially a database, bless you, that is a database that it lives in our world, right, where Microsoft or our partner in the large language model has no necessarily access to that information, where we can add our own data, where we can curate. So we can tap into the large language model, right? It's like we're tapping into the brain, but we're feeding the brain information that either nobody else has or that we curated specifically so it could answer a question with more accuracy, right? So that's a data room, right? I think we have a question. Great question. It's not everything on the internet. We are curating different sources from the internet. We are what it's ours. No, 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 no. We have a few APIs that we tap into. Some are like public platforms. Like for example, we have access to databases of patents, academic research, legal decisions. We curated a series of news publications. We have access to certain parts of Reddit and YouTube, so on and so forth, yeah. So going back here, so QAssist is a chatbot that has been designed in that app layer of the tech stack. It has expert data rooms that allows us to create specialized knowledge. You see a few here, like food, beauty, generational insights, automotive, healthcare, etc. And then he has response models, right, that allows us to facilitate. Like the other thing with generative AI is that much like in the world of I want to say of search bars, so you can be paralyzed by analysis paralysis, like all the different choices that you could have. In the world of generative AI, sometimes you don't know how to do a prompt. Sometimes you're intimidated a little bit. Are you asking the right question or not, etc. So we pre-engineer prompts and also the responses. So like the example that I just showed you is formatted in a very specific way that we've used for 12 years to answer the same question for clients. So we take that and we train the AI on how to answer that. That looks like this. It's like an eye chart, and it's not meant to be like discussed in detail. But the point that I wanted to say is we're using now, and everybody has the ability to do this with your own like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you're using, right? There's a lot of good literature out there on prompt engineering and what it means, etc., right? What you're doing essentially is you're programming using English as your programming language, right? So you're telling the bot, okay, context, your role and industry. You're an expert at this, and you work in this industry. So what it's behind the scenes, the AI is looking, that's the context, that's a corpus of data that's going to be interrogating, right? You're saying, we have, for example, a second level framing, and so we list like skill sets, for example, right? We have an instruction, the template on how to respond. So I want you to respond every time like this. We also have a constraint, which is about format precision. And fail instructions. So if you don't know, don't make it up. In essence, right? You can say, I don't know. That's okay, right? So in any case, so that's how that works. Another way to think about use cases collaborating with AI, right, comes from, very famously from divergent and convergence thinking, right? So there's types of AI that are really good at divergent thinking, right? And there are some that are better at convergence thinking. There are applications that are better at one thing or the other. So for example, in divergent thinking, quantity matters a great deal, right? I mean, you're exploring possibility, right? A horizontal view matters, right? If you're an expert in, let's say, pharmaceuticals, right, and you spend every single day thinking about pharmaceuticals, et cetera, et cetera, if you're going to be working on innovation for a particular new application of secondary application of an existing drug or something like that, or if you're going to be marketing something new, you are going to benefit a great deal from being able to like shift your focus horizontally. Like think about people more holistically, how they live their lives, where they work, Are they parents? Are they not? Are they caregivers? So on and so forth, right? And that's part of divergent thinking. Being able to dream up new concepts and ideas and create choices is really what we're doing here, right? So the very early days of generative AI, you had the idea of generative design. And a lot of designers were working with tools like Autodesk had a tool in the lab called Dreamcatcher, right? And you have like designers that were working with it, and then suddenly they were saying, now I have like 20,000 options, so I need to adopt a little bit my role and change it, right? So in the context of divergent thinking and tools that can support divergent thinking using some of the different AI methods that we've discussed, right? This is one that we call Quinn. And it's a tool that we use actively in work sessions, right? So we have a workshop or creative work session or whatever, group of people come together. The tool is ingesting audio, right? So you see here on the left here, on the top left, you're seeing a live feed of the audio, and I'm going to hit play so you can see that. So that's sort of the humans in the room talking, right? So it's capturing the audio, creating a transcript. And what we do is that we pre-train the tool. So we say, this is a conversation about AI, right, which is very meta in this case, right? So you see on the right a signal. We gave it a bunch of different signals on the topic, right? It's the intersection of AI, advertising, and synthetic media, right? So that's sort of the topic of this particular discussion, right? At the moment here, we're talking about personality and chatbots. You know that because there's a word cloud that's being created in real time as the conversation happens. And then in the middle of it, you have the tool proposing topics and agreeing or disagreeing, right, with the speakers. And then on the right, and you'll see that we do this with many other tools, you have questions, right? So it's a little bit like we're used to prompt the AI, but it's the AI prompting us that we think is most interesting, right? So you could bring the tool as an analyst sitting behind the room, and it's going to create a report at the end of the work session, by the way, automatically. So, that alone already helps. Like, you don't have to take notes, and it connects the topics of discussion with the knowledge that you're giving it, right? Or you could say, hey, the AI has a question. And then you see all the play buttons there. You hit play on any of them, and it will say the question. So that's one way in which AI can aid the process of divergent thinking by bringing a new perspective, bringing a new voice. Is it better than humans? Is it worse? It doesn't really matter. It's a point of view that can suddenly bring up 10, 20 questions that you might not be thinking about. Another way, this is more in the lab. Engineers love cats, so sorry about all the cats, but we haven't really incorporated this into the tool set, but we're playing with it, right? And what this is doing is, where you see there's a little bar at the top that says prompt, right? So this is creating images in real time as you're typing, which can also be done if you're talking, right? And the prompt says a cat wearing a business suit with glasses, right? And what makes this interesting to us is that it's exploring very different options in real time, and it's giving people who might not consider themselves creative, and we all know that that's not true. Everybody is creative only by nature of being human. But a lot of people are in a work session, in a design workshop, and are saying, oh, I don't work for the design team, or I'm not in the creative team, or etc. But I have an idea, I just don't know how to explain it or visualize it, or etc. And I feel constrained by that, right? So this is suddenly helping us sort of take what's in your head in real time and put it out so you can see it, so other people can see it, so on and so forth, right? And again, it's very early days, so the use case will definitely be more on the generative, speculative design space, and as you can imagine, there's all sorts of different applications when you start to get into beyond images into video and other spaces, which is a possibility. Another way of thinking divergence thinking. So we looked at a couple of examples that are more sort of group sessions, right? So you have a workshop, and then you have sort of an AI companion to the workshop, or an AI companion that visualizes ideas from the workshop. This one is a little bit more for individual users. We call it Q Sparks. And it's designed more for the communication space, for the creative ideation space in marketing, communication, advertising, and media, right? So what it does is, it's going to take input from you, like if you're creating a creative brief of sorts, right? So in this case, I'm using the example of beauty category. I'm looking at skincare. CeraVe is the brand, and I'm saying my business objective here is to get millennial men to use skincare, right? So in that context, what the AI is doing is, is curating the corpus of data that's going to use based on that brief. Now, it's going to ask me, but give me a bit more information about who, right? So we said already it's millennial, we said it's men, and we have a number of other parameters, and I'm adding here, for example, education and people with college degrees, right? So that's what it's looking at. I could add an audience description and say gamers or people who are into this particular TV show or so on and so forth. And then it's going to give me a number of ideas, right? And it's going to connect it back to our trend set. So it's going to look at, what are trends that are connecting skincare and men, right? And then it's going to sort of read the space and analyze it. And then it's going to come back and say, hey, here are some ideas that you could look at, right? And here are some different ways in which these ideas could play to life. And again, we're talking about a creative companion for a person that's going to be doing a lot more research, right? You could stop here, or you could say, hey, I got the ideas that I want. Now I want to apply more convergent thinking, and I'm going to say, I love this space that you're giving me, connecting millennial men to skincare and this particular trend of new masculinity ideas in culture and new rituals and behaviors, etc., etc. Now I need to really get serious about producing a document that I could put in front of a client, right? So in that context, the tool is going to continue, and it's going to give you different choices. And now it becomes more of an editor, right? So it is doing some pre-work for you. It is defining the audience based on the data, the corpus of data that you selected at the beginning by giving it parameters. It is allowing you to make choices to say, I want to focus on this empathy insight, or this data point is going to be best used by the creative team to bring the idea to life, for example, or this is the action that I think synthesizes what we're trying to do in a way that's most constructive. So it's going to have a bunch of different ways for you to customize it, to co-create it. And this is a process that, in our case, it used to take many days of research, and now you can accelerate it to a very short period of time, right? You could do it in an hour, or you could do it in an afternoon, depending on how much you're going to complement, right? So staying in the topic of convergent thinking, right? So we come from, we ideated, we did a lot of divergence of ideas, etc. Now we have a body of work that we want to synthesize, right? We want to either synthesize it for the purposes of providing inputs to other humans, or providing a recommendation. So there are different ways in which we do that, right? And we think about how, again, going back to the idea, collaborating with AI, how do we learn? How do we learn faster using some of these tools, and how do we use them productively? In this case, we're looking at a tool that we use to create briefings, right? So briefings on different topics, right? We are organizing it in before, during, and after. So before you do the briefing, and typically for us, the briefing is a conversation with a group of people, and that's informed by a topic. So this is the analyst doing the briefing. It's called the female dollar. It uploaded a bunch of research. The AI read the research and is telling you these are all the different organizations that are in the research, and here are some experts that you can bring to your briefing. You say, yes, I like that. So it creates a synopsis to help you prepare for the briefing. It looks at all the different pieces of data that you uploaded or information. It could be academic papers or it could be articles, etc. And it's giving you a synopsis with takeaways that you can bring to moderate the discussion. And it's also, again, this idea of the AI prompting the human, right? So bringing questions to the forefront, right? So you can say, oh, this question is actually triggering a thought that makes me want to go and add different information to the briefing, so you will go back and modify it, right? So it's allowing for some interactivity there. And then let's say you had the session. So we record every single briefing that we do. And that recording goes through the tool that you saw at the beginning called Quinn that takes sort of all that input in. And then that tool creates a summary of the discussion, right? So this summary is now taking into consideration all the data that we use to produce the briefing and the discussion that happened in the room. So it's taking now the context of the humans that had the conversation in the room, it's putting highlights, connecting the industries that we discussed, and these are all the different moments in which we had conversations, right? So you click on any of them and go to a clip of a video of the moment where that conversation happens. So you have like a 1-hour workshop on a topic. This is going to take that workshop and break it down for you so you can go back to it and interrogate it very clearly. So, yes.
How do you envision, especially because the company has done work around the idea of ethics, right, and trust. How do you envision managing the democratization of this type of data with many people, right? Many people having kind of the same discussion. Obviously, they would use different reports, so you would have slightly different angles. But how do you envision the management of that? Because I just would imagine that a lot of the marketing campaigns would look very similar, or you know, and moving away from kind of like the human differences that we have that makes us beautiful. So how do you envision that happening?
That's a great question. So this particular tool that we're looking at, right, is providing synthesis, organizing information, but it's not necessarily making the choice, right? So in the context of your question, right, we don't believe that you should take the human outside of it, right? And that you should, you know, we're not looking at none of these tools is necessarily like creating like a campaign for you, right? It's more, how do you use a tool to enrich the moment, right? To bring information from the outside in a way that is less time intensive, for example. That also brings a level of intuition that's decidedly not human, right? And in that context, it might bring ideas that you might not be considering, but it's not replacing it, it's not substituting, it's creating choices, right? And you could argue more choices are better than less. And you could argue also that if you have control, right, to your question about democratizing access, right, if I understand it correctly, we're giving full control to the people that are using these tools and platforms. Any other questions? That's a great question. Thank you. This is another way in which the AI works more from an editorial standpoint. And you know, I think if you're working in the world of media, you know, you're seeing a lot of poor use of AI, and I think some of it has been exposed very recently. And it's, you know, when you are using AI to substitute the work of a journalist, for example, right? When you're using AI to substitute the work of a writer, right? In this case, it's more of how do you use AI to capture the essence of the conversation and then bring it to life in a way that allows the editorial process to flow very seamlessly, right? So there's a number of different briefings here that are connected to topics that we explore every week. And then we point some of the models that we've trained on those topics to digest the information and organize it automatically in a way that facilitates sort of a media experience, right? So, you know, essentially it's like a digital magazine that's created out of all of the discussions that are happening every week in the office. Another category is agents, right? And if you remember, like going back to the AI tool stack that we saw at the very beginning with like the data and the foundation models and the computing environment, and then on the very top you had applications, and then you have agents, right? Agents is a space that definitely suggests that if you're not super familiar, that you go and do your research. There's some free tools out there that you can test when it comes to building your own agents. In essence, an agent is going to be an AI that has a job that you determine, that goes out into the wild and does that job for you and then comes back, right? And this is the type of AI that's capturing the imagination of some of the tech leaders out there. If you read Bill Gates' 2024 letter, starts, but somewhere in the very beginning, there's a pretty bold prediction from him that this is the space where AI is going to go, right? And it's the question of you having your personal agent, right? You having sort of a personal intelligence that's going to be automating a lot of the work that you do today. In our world, we have an experimental agent that we started to play with, that essentially what it's doing is you can give it instructions that are very specific. Like, for example, you can say, in this case, these are some of the areas that we can point the agent at. So I'm looking at academic research here, for example. And I'm saying, retrieve papers about digital twins and explain how they were selected and how influential they are in the field, right? So it's going to look, and it's going to go into that specific database, and it might be outside of our system. It's going to read all the digital twin papers. It's going to compile a list based on citations and influence, and then it's going to explain it back to me, right? And the whole process takes maybe a few minutes, right? The interesting thing also is that we built also the ability for the agency to actually bring the papers. So if I want to double check the work or go deeper into one of the papers, like I can do that as well, right? I could ask this agent all sorts of things, right? I mean, any question would be fair game, and I think the value of it is not just that it can do the work for you, but it can access the most current information as it's happening. So it doesn't have a constraint of being limited to a particular database. This is sort of the last use case that I wanted to share, and it's sort of deeper intelligence analysis, right? So a lot of the work that we do, and a lot of the work that you do and that your students do, is related to looking at large bodies of data and analyzing it, right? And we believe that the way we're going to do that is changing by the minute, right? And the framework that we're using, and this is sort of, I think, something that can be replicated with different tools that are out there, is number one, being very clear on the type of inputs, so apples to apples, right? So if you're looking at academic papers, if you're looking at specific articles on a topic, or if you're looking at posting social media, etc., making sure that those inputs are structured in a way that's consistent. Then having a system where you have pre-trained models, so you're giving context and you're giving purpose to the AI. You're saying we're going to be producing a report, and the report is going to be produced for this particular purpose. Having some safety and responsible, so checks and balances, so you can double check information, so there's transparency as to how decisions were made by the AI in the part of synthesis, and then outputs that you can control, right? That you can fully edit, that you can have absolute last say in how they happen. So this is the one sort of interface that we're using at the moment to do this. So on the left side, this is your control panel. So these are all of the instructions that you're giving the AI. On the right-hand side, think about it like a word editor that you can edit with the AI in tandem, right? So in this context, I gave the AI information about income and wealth inequality in the context of the impact of AI. I gave it a short description, which you can see as an input in the right side, and I had uploaded a few PDFs with research on the topic. Right? You could also go and say suggest input for this paper, so it will go and do research and come back to you with, I think these 5 articles will be amazing to complement your research here, for example. Right? So you can then hit generate report, and this is sort of the summary of the report. It is going to provide a more synthesized series of insights or lessons learned from looking at it. Again, going back to the idea of AI providing questions to the user, it's going to do things like analyze industries and trends and very, very specific sources that will summarize then for you, right? So it takes a first pass at it. And it allows you to then go back and say, okay, I'm going to read it, and I'm going to start asking questions, right? And you could say, oh, I'm looking at this particular paragraph. I want to edit this, right? So I'm selecting a particular space. I'm going to hit the edit tool. But this is a different type of editing, right? I mean, you have more capability now, right? So I can say, hey, add an example here that I can go and double check. Or expand this idea, or this idea is very complex, so I need you to clarify the idea, right? So you then, you can play with anything, or add industries, for example, like I want this concept, like filter it through the lens of the different industries that are covered on the paper, right? You can accept your edits, and then you can export it into sort of visual PowerPoint presentation or a different type of report, etc. Right? So if you're an analyst and you're following a particular sector that's changing super fast, you now have the ability to produce a lot more synthesis of what's happening in the space and a lot of control in terms of what goes in and out. So those are a few use cases. They're not exhaustive. We have a lab that's producing things like this like every single day. I wanted to leave you with 2 things. One is sort of what I'm learning personally from this journey, and then a few topics that I'm watching and that we're paying close attention this year. And super happy again to take questions. So there's a new skill that we need to deal with, right? And it's the idea, this space of learning how to work with tools that make choices. If you think about it, like all the way back to the prehistoric times, like a rock is a hammer. As a hammer, it does what you want it to do. All the way forward to the age of computers, you're giving command. Even command is a thing that you give to computers, and then you hit execute, and the thing does what you want it to do. So those are tools. There's an era of tools that execute commands, right, from the hammer to the computer. Now we are entering an era of tools that make choices. And that's going to make that complicates things a lot because it gets our ego involved. They get all sorts of questions to be part of it, right? So the question is not you need to learn how to accept what's coming out of the tool, but the question is you need to learn how to work with tools that create choices, right? Another point here is when it comes to safety and ethics, it's a big question. Been thinking about it for a while. There's a bottoms-up approach and a top-down approach, and they're both good. I say put less emphasis in the top-down, so it's not about like a grand vision for ethics and et cetera. It comes from the top of an organization. It is about that, but also the acknowledgement that this is changing so fast that you have to have measures to understand what the people on the ground are asking. And those questions should inform a living document that you can look at for safety and ethics. I think the idea of writing a job description for the tool it can be useful, particularly for people who are not super technical, and you just want to know, can the tool do this? And write a job description and then work with your engineers or your IT department or whomever is working with you on the more technical side and discuss it, right? And that, I think, levels the field for everybody to be able to participate. Those job descriptions, know this, will affect your job description. Like I recommend you go back to TED Talks and look at the generative design TED Talk from, I forgot the name of the designer, an Italian guy who designs chassis for Formula One vehicles, and he's using Autodesk Dreamcatcher, which is a very early version of like what today we call like Midjourney or Dolly, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a 17-minute talk, and it's very riveting because he says, hey, suddenly as a designer, I'm used to making all the choices. And then I'm looking at what comes out of this thing, and it renders my role in a complete different light. And I got to learn how to accept that and how to deal with it, right? And then at the beginning, I looked at the chassis design that came out of this tool, and I thought it was completely wrong. This is a whole category of things that are wrong, that I need to put on the trash. I had a dream about them. I came back, I look at it, and I'm realizing that this is not a human thinking about it. It's a machine, right? And the machine actually connected the dots between a manufacturing process, it was with like direct injection and different type of manufacturing, and the design. And the design ended up being lighter and more resistant than anything that I could have dreamt with my own. So in that context, his role now is like, it suddenly became of curation, it became of interrogation, it became of now I need to validate and I need to learn, right? I think that's beautiful. I definitely have, I'm on the human side, I'm on the team human side for sure. But I think that some of these tools can make us better at what we do, right? And that's where rethinking our job description comes into play. We're going to have to do this like every few months, every year, every couple of years, right? We're not used to that. That nobody teaches us that in school, right? Know which type of AI is right for the job. It's like the same as what person is right for the job, what AI is type. Hopefully today, at least, if there's one thing you take home with you, it's there are different types of AI and they're not great at the same thing. And maybe if you have an AI that's giving you founding fathers of color, that might be great for a certain use case of a speculative design, et cetera, et cetera. It might be great for cases of representation and thinking about parallel histories and possibilities. Probably not very historically accurate, right? And so I think that this type of knowledge and you as educators can facilitate a bit more of critical thinking around it because it helps like get the noise out, right? And really focus on, okay, why does this happen and how could it be useful? It's all changing very fast, and I think the sophistication means, in certain cases, it means accessibility. And I know we were having a conversation earlier on around the digital divide and access even to the internet, and those are big issues that need to be addressed. But I think that once you have access to some of these tools, it levels the playing field in very important ways. So it democratizes a certain type of skill set, right? And it's a very interesting thing to think about. And encouraging experimentation and learning, regardless of technical expertise, I think is a pretty big takeaway, right? I mean, we're now in an era where you can program in English. You can use English as your programming language. So what can you do with it, right? I mean, we come from the era very recently of like coding. It's like, we're going to teach everyone to code, right? Thank God we didn't do that. But that was sort of the zeitgeist, right? And now you don't need that, right? So all you need is to be brave and start using some of these tools and try to figure out how they intersect in your life. There are books on prompt engineering. They all say different things. We read them all. Nobody is right at this moment on this space, so experimentation is critical. So those are a few lessons learned. Things that we're watching next, I recommend taking a look. Synthetic media is expanding incredibly fast, not uncontroversially. That's an image from Sora. If you have not seen what Sora can do, that's OpenAI's text-to-video tool. Please do Google it and watch it and freak out or love it. And it's incredible. Personal agents, if you haven't heard of Pi, for example, definitely recommend that you take a look at it, that you Even go for some podcasts with interviews with the founders and the team behind it. It's a really interesting vision of personal intelligence. And the thing is programmed with like a degree of emotional empathy that shows like promise. And just remember, like these are all like if you remember when the cell phone was like this big and it didn't work everywhere, like this is like the cell phone in at that time, right? It's gonna get better and better. Robotic applications. I don't know why I use that image. That's definitely a robot that's using generative AI somehow. But I think the application that we are going to see is more like, I don't know if you try to pay at Whole Foods in Houston with the automated kiosk. They're terrible. It's like if Whole Foods is watching, like, kill them. It's a really poor use of technology. But now, like if you have a conversation with Pi, right? So go and have a conversation with Pi, right? And now imagine if that technology could be powering one of those kiosks, right? Like it's like the future is suddenly going to open up to you, right? And then you start to think about, the fact that, in 20, 30 years, there's not going to be enough people to work in those jobs, right? There's like definitely many countries that today they're not going to, like I heard the other day that Germany needs 2 million immigrants every year for the next 20 years to hold the population to what they are today, right? And that's not going to happen. So the Germans are going to need the Whole Food kiosk with generative AI pretty soon. Watch the space of legislation in California. There's some of the more aggressive pieces of legislation, and there's a lot of proposals on the table, and they're very controversial, right? It's important for a number of reasons. California is the heart of AI in the research in the world, and it's also a beacon of legislation in many areas like environmental law, etc. So it's important to be aware of what's happening there this year because a lot going on. Education research is another space that we're watching, particularly with generative AI. Now we are in a couple of years into the mass adoption by every single student, including my own kid. I remember when I asked him, like, hey, dude, have you heard of ChatGPT? And this is like when it's like just had come out, right? And he was on his way to his room, and he's like, oh, I'm on my way to use it. And I'm like, oh my God, like it's incredible, like at the speed at which you can look at charts of adoption of like Facebook, adoption of cell phones, adoption of Snapchat, of TikTok, and then ChatGPT is like a straight line up, right? It's incredibly fast. This is a particular conference happening at the University of Chicago, the School of Business, on March 29th. The first few topics are going to touch on research that's very relevant to the space, so it's definitely an area that we're watching. And then I think I referenced this at the very beginning, small language models. So imagine like a large language model is the thing that makes like a ChatGPT work, etc. A small language model is much more specialized, and what the research shows, Microsoft had launched a couple, is that they can be equally as powerful, right? And they are small in a way where they could run on your phone offline, right? So like it's hard to understate like how important that could be, right? Because it's like you're now democratizing a layer of the tech stack that we review, right? I mean, you remember we are playing in that sort of application AI agent layer, right? Underneath that is the model layer, right? So if that gets opened up for a lot more people to actually build them, the consequences are going to could be like extremely great, extremely worrisome, right? So that's another space that we are watching. As I mentioned, we host briefings as part of our open agency philosophy and learning organization philosophy. Every Tuesday we have 2 sessions. You can attend in person if you're in New York, or you can watch on our LinkedIn page. They tend to be 1-hour sessions. We call them culture briefings. They take on different shapes. Like you're seeing one there. This morning I saw this slide and I'm like, I'm dressed exactly the same. This is a little embarrassing. Sorry, I'm pointing that out. So that's a group of people. We have a couple of, in that particular session, we had a couple of experts on the topic, and it could be anything. Like we are really, next week I'm moderating one on mental health with two fascinating experts on the topic. It could be gaming, the one after. This one in particular is on generative AI and imagining that generative AI had a resume, like what skills, like building those job descriptions. And we're going to have two founders of companies that are approaching the topic from different perspectives. So one of them is like trying to replace humans, and the other one is like more augmenting, etc. So we're not gonna like necessarily like encourage too much debate, but I'm sure there will be a healthy amount of debate. And if you want to join, just go to our website and sign up. Anybody can do that. And that's the end of the presentation. I love to take questions. Thank you.
Hold on. When you're going to ask a question, let somebody get a mic to you so we can capture it. Is there?
It's Tuesday of next week. Yes. Again, you can go to our website. This is the address here, sparksandhoney.com, and or /culture briefing, or just hit on culture briefing, and then you have all the instructions to our SVP and join. I'll leave this up.
I'm loud. No, not loud enough. Okay, sorry. I don't know if this is working. You obviously have to curate for each client that comes in. Mm-hmm. So when you create the maps of information for them, mm-hmm. how do you know what they're going to want to know? How well prepared do they have to be mm-hmm. on how to approach what their goal is?
That's a great question. How long do we have? We approach that question in different ways, and it's all context dependent. So sometimes clients come to us and they give us a book of instructions. It's like, this is what we want, right? And it's like very specific, and we spend a whole weekend like going through like all the like the business cases and all that, so we know pretty clearly what we want to do. Sometimes we have more open dialogue, and in that context we use a lot of the tools that you saw today to get smart on what are the challenges and potential areas of solution that we would want to investigate, and we bring them proactively to them. So roughly like those are two ways in which we do it.
Hi. I just wanted to know if QSparks is available. No? Yeah. All right. Thank you. I just wanted to know if QSparks was available to play around with a little bit for student usage, or if it's something that's not available in that way.
That's a great question. So we haven't gotten there yet. It doesn't mean that we're not going to go there. We have definitely considered collaborating with more academia and creating. The challenge that we have encountered is that we're a relatively small organization and we don't have the service layer. So when we've tried to bring more people from the outside in, etc., like if you subscribe to a platform, let's say Salesforce or any software as a service platform, their business model allows them to have a whole like customer success and like a whole team that will provide service to users. We don't have that, so that has become a barrier. But that doesn't mean that we won't do it in the future.
Oh. Hi, I'm back again.
Hello.
It's kind of more of a simple question, which is, as you talk about the AI and requiring us to have great prompts in order for us to get back good information, and then the idea of it creating prompts for us, it poses the question to me about how do we as educators encourage students to have the idea around critical thinking, not only critical thinking for an exercise, but really thinking in a comprehensive way of understanding the process and materials. We do a lot of detail in classes, and I've seen some students use some ChatGPT in creating essays, but if you ask them the question or to be able to actually do something, they're not able to. And so how do we encourage them to be in that space, not just to get the information to do the test, because that's oftentimes one of the battles that I have as an educator, encouraging them to want to know past the test.
That's an excellent question. It's $1 million question in the world of education today. I've seen, we have a couple of clients in the education space, and I've seen a couple of sort of exploratory ideas on methods where you ask a student to use ChatGPT, and then the assignment is to challenge the answer, right? And in a very structured way, right? So it's less of, so it changes a little bit of the conversation around, you know, the job description of the AI will change my job description. It's a little bit like also like the job description of the student, right? So it's like, you know, and there are certain moments where writing the essay and that becomes an important type of assignment, but there's other type of assignments that could be more about flexing that critical thinking muscle in more direct ways.
Hi, my question is, how do you know when the results of AI are good versus rubbish?
So if you're, it depends with the type of AI that you're working on. So we tend to trust much more models that are in the deterministic machine learning space, right? And in that, and we would use those to guide decisions. In the world of generative AI, we use them more for the purposes of synthesis, which we can validate through a cycle, right? So let's say if you're doing you're synthesizing 10, like we get a lot of questions on, for example, once we had a major news publication coming to us with an assignment. It's like, we have this case, and we want to know if Amazon Alexa can hear you. And all the time, if it's recording. Like, how do we know that, right? And it's like, okay, I mean, we cannot break into Amazon, so that's not, that would be the more direct way to do it, but we could analyze all the patents around voice AI to understand, you know, what. So you can use some of these tools to read the 3,000 patents that were at the moment available, right? And then give you clusters, right? And that will save you a lot of time. And then you can go and then look at the clusters and then validate the ones that would help you answer the question. So go more specific into the details, right? So those validation protocols need to be part of the process of using AI.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What advice would you give to seniors who are just about to enter the workforce in a couple of months, just regarding this technology and how they can use it as they enter the workforce?
I would point them at research that shows, and there's a really great paper from McKinsey, that what generative AI has done in the workplace is level the play field and get people who, you know, you always have like a talent spectrum, and people who've had more privilege and opportunity to study at Ivy League or whatever it is, and have more I think a bigger set of skills and experience under their belt, and they tend to perform better, right? When they did the research, they had a control group, and then they had a group that they were given generative AI tools, and that group performed as good as the top group historically. So I would point them to read that and say, you know, these are tools that are really, like, you can type, and if you can write on a Word document, you can probably use it and just get smart on the space, right?
We have time for one more question, and then also just want to note for the QR code, there's a brief exit survey that if you could help us out, it helps us with our grant reporting, that would be great. You need to be logged into your Gmail account. We'll also email it out after the event. Thank you. And
thank you. Thank you so much. I actually had a question about your team at your company and whether or not you created an employee code of ethics for using AI. I think about the university, how we have a code of ethics that the faculty and the students and staff adhere to. Was there something like that? Do you have something like that in place? And how did that develop?
Yes, we do. The code of ethics for AI was created by the holding company that owns us. They own a number of different companies in the creative space, and they have people who are really smart and specialize in not just ethics but also safety and other type of guidelines. And everybody has to comply even when you're using like tools outside of the company. Every time you use it, you have to sort of read it and say acknowledge and things like that. That's pretty standard procedure, I think, elsewhere. So I was not directly involved, so I could not like go in a little bit in more detail. Good question, though. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today, Camilo.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for making the time to share everything that's going on at Sparks and Honey with us. Thank you, all of you, for being here. If you could do us a favor, like I said before, fill out that exit survey. That would be wonderful. Our next event, as we noted earlier, is going to be on March 15th. I hope you can make it to that as well. And I hope you have a good weekend. Thank you for coming.